You won't believe what just happened at the U.S. Congress this morning. During a live broadcast of a hearing, Jasmine Crockett suddenly interrupted Caroline Leavitt in an atmosphere as tense as a drawn wire. But what no one expected was Caroline's response. No anger, no argument, just a single icy reply that instantly turned the tables, leaving the entire room holding its breath. The atmosphere in the House Oversight Committee hearing was heavy, tense like the calm before a storm. Congress members kept shifting seats, aides whispered behind stacks of open documents, and their eyes scanned nameplates with scrutiny. Everyone could sense a wave about to crash, though no one knew when. C-SPAN broadcasted live, drawing millions of viewers nationwide, from people sipping morning coffee to reporters on edge, to Americans trying to make sense of the deepening turmoil their country faced. Representative Caroline Leavitt, a Republican, was speaking with confidence and precision, dissecting loopholes in campaign finance policy. Suddenly, from 2 seats away, Democratic Representative Jasmine Crockett cut in. "Sit down, girl. Don't embarrass yourself further." The words landed like a punch. It wasn't just what was said, but how. Jasmine's glaring eyes, her tightly pursed lips, a display of contempt that suggested Caroline didn't belong. The term girl carried historical weight. It touched wounds that had never fully healed. Despite both women being dressed in crisp suits and seated behind polished microphones, the room didn't erupt. It froze. For 3 or 4 seconds, everything paused. A male congressman in the back looked up from his papers. An aide blinked in confusion. The stenographer hesitated over the keyboard. Viewers at home rewound their feeds, whispering in disbelief. Caroline didn't flinch. Not a furrowed brow, not a wavering glance. Just steady, even breaths. Her left hand gently set down a sheet of paper. Her icy gaze locked on Jasmine, unwavering. The camera captured the moment perfectly. One woman trying to belittle, the other standing resolute. Before she spoke, the silence seemed to ask, "Did everyone hear that?" Then Caroline said one sentence that flipped the room's energy. "I was elected to represent my district, my values, and every woman who's been told to shrink herself to please others." Her voice wasn't shrill or harsh, but it carried power the microphone could barely hold. Someone near the front sighed, softly, like they'd just seen a perfect dodge and clean counterstrike without a single swing. Jasmine blinked, as if wondering if she'd gone too far. She leaned back, brushing at an invisible speck of dust on her jacket, trying to maintain composure. But the room had shifted. Applause broke out, not thunderous but slow and meaningful. One clap, then another. An older Democratic congressman from Idaho tapped his fingers on the table, face unreadable. Outside the room, social media exploded. Phones buzzed. Screenshots spread like wildfire. A clip posted with the caption, "Jasmine Crockett told Representative Caroline Leavitt to sit down, girl," and instantly paid the price. News channels scrambled, anchors pushing fresh reports across desks. And Caroline? She didn't smile or gloat. She returned quietly to her notes and said, "Now I'd like to continue." After that moment, the hearing lost focus. No one cared about campaign finance policies anymore. Every conversation revolved around tone, respect, and the power of words. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The cameras kept rolling. Most thought it was just a fleeting, explosive moment, a viral clip, a hot headline. But what Caroline Leavitt did next showed. She wasn't about to let it end there. She turned it into something more. In the hearing room, the chair lightly tapped the gavel, calling for order, trying to refocus. But the attention remained fixed on Caroline. Her voice, her control, her refusal to be shaken. Something powerful radiated from her, even through the screens. Jasmine sat back, lips pressed tight. She tried to appear bored, unaffected, but her hands kept moving beneath the table. Caroline didn't mention her again. She didn't need to. Every word afterward carried an unspoken message. "You can't make me small." In the audience, a college intern named Sophia Martinez scribbled furiously. She texted her roommate, "Did you hear what Caroline just said?" Gave me chills. Sophia wasn't alone. Viewers flooded comments and captions quoting Caroline's response. By afternoon, the C-SPAN clip had over 800,000 views. But it wasn't budget charts drawing attention. It was the 35-second clip of Caroline's poised, precise reaction. News channels played the clip on loop. MSNBC dissected the exchange, noting discriminatory undertones. One commentator called her response a masterclass in handling pressure. Even CNN's neutral analysts remarked on her dignity. But it wasn't just political pundits. Ordinary people, those with jobs, kids, bills, felt it. A teacher in Boise posted, "I've been sit-down girl in meetings, classrooms." Her response hit hard. A grandmother in Oklahoma shared, "My mother couldn't speak up like that. I'm proud Caroline Leavitt did." This wasn't drama that faded. It was a moment etched in hearts. By evening, Caroline's press secretary, Ethan Brooks, sat at his desk, scrolling through interview requests. Radio shows, podcasts, even Jon Stewart's team wanted her on. "Jon Stewart still does a show?" Caroline asked. Riley, one of her aides, laughed. "They do political segments." Caroline looked out the window. "Let them wait. I'll speak, but not for applause, not for sound bites, for the girls like me, who've been silenced by that tone." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett issued a brief statement calling the public's reaction overblown and urged people to focus on policy. The statement fell flat. That night at a scholarship ceremony in Baton Rouge, a girl approached Caroline. "My grandma called me crying today. She never thought she'd see someone respond like that. Not yelling, not backing down, just calm." Caroline placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't always have to be calm, just don't let anyone steal your strength." Those words spread fast. People began calling it the Leavitt Declaration. But the echo didn't fade. It grew louder. In San Diego, the clip exploded online. On TikTok, edits of the moment appeared with rap beats, gospel choirs, and captioned slow-mo. One version with the phrase, "This is how a woman who knows her power moves," hit 2 million views. By midnight, a cartoonist in Nevada sketched the scene. Caroline poised at the mic, Jasmine tangled in chords. Caption, "When you try to silence someone but make their voice louder." Hashtags trended. One moment, 1,000 meanings. People were talking. Long threads appeared as users shared experiences, meetings, interviews, classrooms. A woman wrote, "I'm 45 with 2 degrees in a business, but last week a man called me girl while I explained data he didn't understand." Caroline's face in that hearing? That was me. Soon celebrities chimed in. Kerry Washington quoted Caroline. Shonda Rhimes posted the clip with one word, dignity. But what pushed the moment beyond virality was the response from everyday people. Moms, students, veterans, office workers. Not sharing for drama, but because Caroline voiced what they lived. BuzzFeed ran a piece. Caroline Leavitt just gave a masterclass in holding power without losing cool. The Cut called it the most powerful 2 seconds in politics this year in Soe, D.C. Her team scrambled to handle the messages. Some were press, but most weren't. People wrote letters to say thank you. A woman from Columbus wrote that she hadn't watched the news in years, but her daughter showed her the clip, and she cried. A retired Navy officer wrote, "Ma'am, I don't agree with your politics, but you didn't make a scene. You stood firm. That matters." Not all feedback was positive. Pundits tried to spin the story. Some called it theater. Others downplayed the insult. But the public didn't need explanations. They knew what they saw. It was recognition, to be continued in part. 2. The energy in Washington did not fade overnight. Instead, it shifted and multiplied, branching into conversations across cable news, community meetings, and college classrooms. The clip of Caroline Leavitt's poised reply continued to dominate. Headlines and hashtags, becoming a reference point in debates about civility, gender, and racial bias in political spaces. As the hearing fallout evolved into a nationwide movement, Caroline remained unusually silent. She didn't need to amplify the moment. It was speaking loudly on its own. In her Washington office, Caroline gathered with her team to review the IC's next steps. Riley, her communications lead, scrolled through a new batch of requests. "You've got a formal invitation to speak at the Women in Public Service Summit in D.C., she announced. "They want you to open the conference." Caroline looked up thoughtful. "Let them know I'm considering it, but I don't want this to become performative." Her voice was firm. "We don't play to cameras. We play to change." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett struggled to manage the narrative. Her office released another statement, this one more conciliatory in tone but still not an apology. It attempted to shift the conversation back to policy priorities and legislative achievements, but the public wasn't ready to pivot. The comment section under her social media posts remained ablaze with criticism and demands for accountability. Behind closed doors, Jasmine met with her senior advisors. "This isn't going away," one said. "We either get ahead of it or let it define you." Jasmine nodded slowly. "I'll issue a statement that acknowledges the impact," she said. "But it needs to come from me directly, not my press team." The next morning, Jasmine addressed a gathering of local leaders in Richmond. Her tone was reflective. "What I said wasn't just misinterpreted," she began. "It was hurtful, not just to Caroline Leavitt, but to many who watched. I can't take back those words, but I can commit to learning from them." The speech earned polite applause. It wasn't viral, but it was human. Still, the contrast with Caroline's composed silence and dignity remained striking. Caroline, on the other hand, had accepted a different kind of invitation, one to speak with students at Howard University. In a modest auditorium, surrounded by future lawyers, activists, and community organizers, she shared her thoughts. "I didn't respond the way I did because I wanted attention," she said. "I responded that way because I've seen what happens when silence is taken for weakness. We need to teach the next generation that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it speaks just once, clearly." The crowd erupted in applause. After the event, a law student named Aria approached her. "I've been in that room," she said, "where they talk over you, minimize you. I never knew how to respond without becoming the angry woman. But you showed us." Caroline squeezed her hand. "You already knew how. You just needed to see it once." Back on the Hill, the ripple effects of the exchange inspired new efforts. Several female lawmakers began informal conversations about establishing professional standards for communication in hearings. What started as a one-line clapback was now a serious discussion about institutional respect. Meanwhile, media outlets continued covering the aftermath. One New York Times columnist wrote, "Caroline Leavitt didn't just respond to an insult. She rewrote the rule book on political poise." On The View, panelists debated whether Jasmine's remark reflected systemic issues. Even Fox News, typically critical of Democratic figures, aired multiple segments praising Caroline's restraint. In a Sunday morning meeting, Caroline and her senior team reviewed the draft of a potential resolution aimed at establishing conduct guidelines during public hearings. Ethan, her policy advisor, read from the text, "The resolution calls for language accountability and respectful discourse, particularly in reference to gender and racial identity." Riley added, "This isn't just about what happened, it's about preventing it from happening again." Caroline nodded. "Then we move forward. Not because we're angry, because we're responsible." Jasmine, meanwhile, continued with her legislative work. She introduced a bill focused on small business loans for minority entrepreneurs and participated in community outreach, but the shadow of the hearing lingered. Some constituents still voiced support, but others expressed disappointment. "You lost me when you made it personal," one voter commented on her Instagram post. As the political storm slowly settled, one thing became clear. The confrontation was not a blip. It was a cultural moment. In schools, homes, and workplaces, people revisited that scene. Teachers used it to explain professionalism. Employers cited it during sensitivity training. Parents talked about it with their children. The conversation extended far beyond Congress, And yet Caroline refused to capitalize on it for spectacle. She kept her schedule, returned to her district, and resumed meetings with local leaders. When asked by a reporter if she planned to write a book about the moment, she shook her head. "If I do anything," she said, "it'll be to help others who feel silenced find their voice." That help was already underway. A nonprofit named Voice Forward partnered with her to launch a new mentorship program aimed at young women entering politics. The tagline was simple but powerful. Say it, mean it, stand tall. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine and Caroline didn't speak directly, but their paths continued to intersect at hearings, panels, and committee meetings. The tension had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, an uneasy recognition that their clash had forced the nation to examine itself. Caroline's resolution slowly gained bipartisan co-sponsors. It didn't matter whether it passed right away. What mattered was that it existed, a formal, written acknowledgement that words matter, that tone matters, that dignity matters. And for millions who watched that moment unfold live or on replay, Caroline Leavitt had become more than a congresswoman. She was a symbol, a statement, a standard, to be continued in Part 3. Meanwhile, the story surrounding Caroline Leavitt and Jasmine Crockett continued to evolve, not just in headlines but in communities across America. The Stand Like Caroline campaign picked up momentum. It was no longer a viral clip. It was a call to action. Young women who had once hesitated to raise their hands in classrooms were now leading discussions, inspired by Caroline's steady resolve in that congressional room. Parents wrote in, saying their daughters watched the clip repeatedly. Schools invited Caroline to speak. Nonprofits requested her participation in leadership workshops. And Caroline responded the same way she did on that unforgettable day. Calm, confident, focused. In Washington, her team worked diligently behind the scenes. Caroline had begun collaborating with bipartisan lawmakers to push forward her gender equity education bill. It wasn't about pointing fingers or replaying the incident. With Jasmine, it was about translating that moment into meaningful legislation. If we change how kids see each other, Caroline told her aide Riley, we can change how they treat each other as adults. The hearings continued, but every time Caroline spoke, her words carried more weight. The committee chair noticed it. Opponents did too. Her composure had become her power. She didn't interrupt, she didn't raise her voice. But when she spoke, people leaned in. Across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett struggled to reclaim her narrative. She delivered speeches, visited schools, appeared in interviews, but the response remained lukewarm. Her social media was filled with carefully crafted posts about policy, but comments still referenced that one moment. One follower wrote, "You don't fix tone with captions." Her political base began to fracture. Donors stayed, but the enthusiasm had dimmed. Caroline, meanwhile, began receiving letters from abroad. A group of women in South Africa wrote about watching the clip during a workshop on dignity. A teacher in Tokyo played it for her students, translating the subtitles herself. An editor from the UK asked to feature Caroline in a piece titled, Modern, Grace in Politics. Despite the growing attention, Caroline stayed grounded. She still attended the early morning community meetings. She visited schools in low-income neighborhoods. She wrote thank you notes to volunteers. She often reminded her team, this isn't about being right. It's about doing right. At a leadership summit in North Carolina, Caroline was introduced to a crowd of college students. The MC didn't mention her political affiliations or titles, only her poise. As Caroline took the stage, the room quieted. She looked around and said, "You've seen the clip. Now let's talk about what we do next." She didn't talk about Jasmine. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke about how respect and disagreement build stronger democracies. She talked about how silence can be powerful when used to protect your worth, not surrender it. Her message wasn't partisan. It was human. Later that day, a college student named Amina approached her. "I didn't know someone could be strong without yelling. You taught me that." Caroline smiled and responded, Strength comes in many forms. Find yours and protect it. In Washington, Caroline introduced the dignity and respect in public service resolution. It called for a new code of conduct in congressional hearings, mandatory training in inclusive communication, and peer review boards to ensure accountability. It faced resistance, especially from those who considered it symbolic. But Caroline didn't waver. Symbols inspire action, she said, and action is what we need. Behind closed doors, some lawmakers who once dismissed her began to offer quiet support. They saw the letters, the school visits, the growing wave of respect. A Republican senator told her, "I don't agree with everything you say, but I respect how you say it." Caroline knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but she also knew the moment had already left its mark. It lived in every woman who shared her story. It breathed in every student who watched her stand without flinching. It spread every time someone said, "I didn't shout, but they heard me." As Jasmine Crockett retreated from the limelight, Caroline stepped into it with purpose. She didn't gloat or attack. She led, with grace, with focus, with clarity, and the world watched. The hearing room remained charged after the tense exchange between J.D. Vance and Gavin Newsom. Senators, though accustomed to fiery debates, still felt the heat of this hearing where the nation's political future was being weighed. Chairman Margaret Hensley, with a stern demeanor, tapped her gavel lightly to move to the next phase, testimony from additional witnesses. These individuals, from different perspectives, would shed new light on the chaos in Los Angeles, clarifying the picture painted by Vance and Newsom's sharp words. The first to take the stand was Colonel Rachel Torres, commander of a federal National Guard unit deployed to Los Angeles. She stepped to the podium, her uniform crisp, her eyes calm but betraying tension. When Senator Daniel Brooks, an ally of Vance, posed a question, her voice rang clear. "Colonel Torres, can you describe the actual situation when your forces arrived in Los Angeles? Did California's state government support your efforts?" Torres took a deep breath, then answered, "Senator, when we arrived, the situation was already tense. Protesters were blocking major streets, and there were reports of clashes with local police. But the biggest issue was the lack of clear information from the state government. There was no unified command, no coordinated plan. We had to adapt on our own, which led to some misunderstandings with local forces." Her testimony prompted nods from Republican senators, but Newsom, seated in the front row, subtly shook his head, jotting down notes. Senator Clara Nguyen, a Newsom supporter, quickly intervened. "Colonel, you mentioned lack of coordination, but did you receive any specific guidance from the federal government before deployment? Or was your unit simply sent in without a plan?" Torres hesitated, then admitted, "We received direct orders from the Department of Defense. It's true that specific guidance on coordinating with California was limited." This admission sparked murmurs in the room, and a post quickly appeared. On social media, National Guard admits lack of plan from Trump. The next witness was Maria Alvarez, an immigrant community leader from East Los Angeles. With her hair neatly tied back and a voice trembling slightly with emotion, she recounted the stories of those affected by ICE raids. "I represent thousands of families, people who've lived here for decades, working hard, raising children. When ICE started their sweeps, they didn't just target criminals. They knocked on doors of people like my mother, a cleaner for 30 years with no criminal record. Fear spread through the community, and that's why people took to the streets." Alvarez turned to Vance, her eyes sharp as a blade. "Vice President, you call them troublemakers. I call them people fighting to survive." Alvarez's testimony drew applause from Democratic senators, but Vance maintained a cold expression, scribbling notes. Senator Brooks pressed her. "Miss Alvarez, do you deny that some protesters engaged in violence, destroying property?" Alvarez responded firmly, "I don't condone violence, but I understand why people are angry. When you're treated like a criminal in your own home, what do you do?" Her response silenced the room, and a viral post spread. Maria Alvarez speaks for the heart of immigrants. The final witness was Lieutenant James Carter, a Los Angeles police officer present at the scene. Tall and with a deep voice, he recounted the chaotic days. We worked around the clock trying to keep the peace. But when the National Guard showed up, things got complicated. They weren't familiar with LA's urban terrain, and some of their actions, like using tear gas in densely populated areas, escalated the crowd rather than calming it. Carter glanced at Newsom as if seeking solidarity. We requested additional resources from the state, and the governor provided them immediately. The feds, they just made things messier. Senator Nguyen seized the moment. Lieutenant, you said the National Guard made things worse. Can you provide a specific example? Carter nodded. There was an incident in Skid Row where the Guard blocked the street without notifying us. This funneled protesters into a dead end, leading to a clash that injured 3 people. With coordination, we could have avoided that. His testimony drew frowns from Republican senators, while Newsom gave a slight nod as if vindicated. As the witnesses left the podium, Chairman Hensley called for order. The perspectives from Torres, Alvarez, and Carter painted a complex picture. A city torn between federal policy and state autonomy, between community outrage and coordination breakdowns. On social media, posts exploded. LA cop confirms Trump made things worse and Vance needs to explain the Guard's chaos. Senators began asking follow-up questions, but it was clear these testimonies had shaken Vance's arguments while bolstering Newsom's position. The hearing was no longer just a battle between 2 men, but a clash of values. Federal power versus state autonomy, hardline immigration policy versus compassion. After the secondary witnesses' testimonies, Vance knew he needed a strong blow to regain the upper hand. His face was calm, but his eyes glinted with determination, like a strategist ready to flip the board. Chairman Margaret Hensley nodded, signaling him to begin his final round of questioning. Vance stepped to the podium, holding a new set of documents with a black cover bearing the Department of Homeland Security seal. He looked straight at Gavin. Newsom, his voice low but sharp as an arrow. Governor Newsom, you've spent hours talking about California's efforts, about compassion, about state rights. But I want to bring everyone back to an undeniable truth. Los Angeles became a battlefield under your leadership, and I have evidence showing you knew the situation would escalate, but chose to stand on the sidelines. The room fell silent. Newsom furrowed his brow, his grip tightening on his pen, clearly feeling the weight of the accusation. Vance held up a sheet of paper, his voice growing sharper. This is an internal report from the California governor's office, leaked 2 days ago. It shows you received warnings from the Los Angeles Police Department about the rising risk of violence 3 days before the protest spiraled out of control. But what did you do? No increased forces. No urgent federal assistance requested. Instead, you held a press conference to attack President Trump. Governor, is this how you lead? Murmurs spread across the room. Senator Daniel Brooks smirked, while Senator Clara Nguyen shook her head, whispering to a colleague. Newsom stood, his eyes blazing, but his voice remained calm. Vice President Vance, you're trying to paint me as irresponsible, but you've overlooked a key detail. That report, if you read it closely, also states, we requested additional federal resources, not troops, but logistical support. The White House didn't respond. Instead, Trump sent the National Guard, unannounced, uncoordinated, and turned Los Angeles into a political battlefield. Vance didn't let Newsom escape. He flipped another page in his documents, his voice lowering, each word like a hammer strike. Governor, you talk about coordination, but let me show you something else. He held up a short video clip projected on the room's large screen. The footage appeared. A crowd of protesters in Los Angeles smashing store windows while a small group chanted anti-immigration policy slogans. Vance paused the video, staring at Newsom. This video, publicly posted on social media, shows protesters acting violently under your management. Can you say this is the federal government's fault? Or will you admit that California's lax immigration policies enabled these actions? The audience in the room held their breath. Republican senators applauded, while Newsom clenched his fists, clearly cornered. He responded, his voice filled with passion but still controlled. Vice President, you cherry-pick a video to tell your story, But you ignore the context. Those in the video don't represent the thousands of peaceful protesters who took to the streets to protect their families from ICE raids. You want me to take responsibility, fine. But ask Trump, why did he order the Guard to use aggressive tactics, pushing people into desperation? That's the real spark. Vance smiled, a cold smile, and delivered his final blow. Governor, talk about peaceful, but I have another document. From the Los Angeles Police Department itself. It shows 25% of those arrested during the protests were linked to extremist groups previously flagged. You were informed about these groups but took no action. That's not leadership. That's neglect of duty. He paused, staring at Newsom. The American people deserve to know. Why did you let Los Angeles descend into chaos? And why do you still refuse to admit your mistakes? The room erupted in applause from the Republican side. Senator Brooks stood shouting, "That's right!" Newsom, for the first time, seemed shaken. He opened his mouth to retort, but Chairman Hensley banged her gavel. "Governor, you'll have a chance to respond later," she said. But Newsom's eyes showed he knew he'd lost ground. Some Newsom supporters fired back. "This is Trump's dirty political game." As Chairman Hensley banged her gavel to close the hearing, the Senate chamber still vibrated with the aftermath of the fierce confrontation. J.D. Vance left the podium with a confident gaze, his victory cemented by his final strike against Gavin Newsom. Meanwhile, Newsom, though cornered, maintained a resilient facade, his eyes promising a fight far from over. The room slowly emptied, but the whispers of senators and the clacking of reporters' keyboards echoed, spreading the story worldwide. Through social media, the debate didn't resolve the unrest in Los Angeles. California, under Newsom's leadership, filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, challenging the legality of the National Guard's federalization.